You have music playing? All right, we are live here. And we're going to have a conversation today that's really important that we have as, I believe, as society, as how we talk about what's happening in the world right now, in our country, specifically in the United States, for those who are watching. And it's a conversation that shouldn't be because of one incident or one day and then we're done having the conversation. This is going to be an ongoing conversation. The title of today's video, which many of you may have seen in the description, it said racism and being white. And the reason I wrote that is because I'm white and there's racism in our culture and we have to be able to discuss that. And I want to learn, and I do not believe in any way that we should always be looking and going, hey, there's racism. We have to figure out and make sure that we get that all solved by others. I believe we have to start and look at going, all right, what can I do to make a difference? That also means I need to be willing to listen to what I need to be better at, maybe what I failed in the past, where I can make a difference going forward, both mindset, culturally, and in actual actions. So today we could have a few different people joining us on this video. I don't know who's going to pop in when, but we're going to start here with Karen. And here's exactly what I do. I want everybody watching this to know exactly how this occurred. So we're totally transparent. I sent out a message to individuals, to Black individuals who I know, friends, colleagues, and said, I want to have this conversation and I want to be an ear to listen so I can learn and others can learn. And I want to hear perspective, no one specific perspective. I just want to hear perspective and I want to hear experience and knowledge, because I know that no person can actually walk a mile in someone's shoe. I know that is cliche because I don't have the 25 years or the 40 years in your shoes before that mile. And that changes how you see everything compared to how I see it. What I'm seeing is my 40 years with 1 mile in yours. That's totally different. So Karen, we're all having this conversation much triggered by so much that's been going on in the news lately. It could be anything from the case in Georgia to the case in Minneapolis and discussing these. What are some things you think people are failing to understand or failing to discuss?
It's really a lot of avoidance. I posted something, we could talk about it later, but I posted something about the incident in Minneapolis. And really, it was more an incident that happened at work yesterday. And, it's so funny. When I post a picture of my kid, like the likes and the loves go up into the hundreds. And, when you post something that's a little more serious or there's a little more gravity behind it, something that might be uncomfortable for people to talk about or even think about, it's just kind of like, we'll just scroll by.
I appreciate that because I know the post. So I want to get into that post. I'm going to bring in, we have also another individual with us here today, and that's Kelly Charles Collins. So I love that we're going to be having this conversation because I wanted Kelly to be here for this part of the conversation too, because Karen, your post was really powerful. It's something that happened at work, being live virtual at work, but it happened. So if you could share what that was, because I think it'll take us down in a very important conversation.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I'm working at home just like everyone else is right now, or hopefully everyone else is. Obviously, there's some people that are still on the front lines, having to march into work. But I work in the compliance and risk organization for a large bank. And we had an all hands call. And just to give you a little perspective, this was pretty much the top level of the risk organization. So everybody who falls under the risk umbrella was on this call, thousands of people in the risk organization. We have been having these historically only quarterly. And since, the lockdown, we've been doing these monthly. So pretty much since March. And, it pretty much goes, and this is kind of the gist of my post as well. We start off with updates, when are things going to be, open back up so we can go into the office, kind of a rah, like everybody's doing a great job. Everybody, pivoted to adjust to working at home and dealing with, you can hear my little one in the background.
That's life these days.
Always when I'm not muted. Everybody's had to make huge adjustments to basically continue working as normal, but at home. And so none of us were, face to face in a room with each other. This is all on the phone. There's no video conferencing. It's just voices. And at the end or the second half of the call, there was a Q&A. So we can ask our leadership any questions, about anything that was discussed. And one man spoke up toward the end, and they put you in a queue. So what happens is everybody is muted. And then when you want to ask a question, you dial *1 or something like that, and you get placed into a queue. He happened to have come in at the very end of the queue when our global human resources officer had left the call. So he prefaced his call by saying, this is really directed to HR. I don't know if I should ask it. Our chief risk officer said, well, why don't you go ahead? If I can't answer it, then I will definitely relay it to our HR officer and we'll get you an answer. And his question, I've never heard anything like this in any work setting I've ever been in. And I was, at the beginning of it, I was just like, oh my God, did this just happen? His question was, with all the resources that our company is providing, to deal with COVID, backup childcare, adult care, resources for dealing with any kind of emotional stress, life events, things like that. Does the company have any issue or any resources dedicated to helping employees deal with the trauma related to the, racial attacks on Blacks in America? And that question came out of his mouth. I was like, oh crap, what's going to happen right now? And once he got through explaining where he was coming from, and he really shouldn't have had to explain, but he did. And I appreciate it, because I was like, yes, yeah, you asked the question, like, thank you. I was proud, and I was stunned. I was humbled. Like, every emotion you could think of came up at that moment, but it was just like, that really needed to be asked. He talks about, and keep in mind, this is a Fortune 500 company, and we're all in the risk organization. We have relatively good positions, some better than others. I'll, for the sake of argument, say that he does exactly what I do. He's employed. He's not a criminal. He is just like me, probably has a family, has a steady job. And he admitted that he is feeling a lot of stress, that he is terrified for his life on a daily basis. He says he talks with his friends. They're feeling the exact same way. And it's not just when, something like, George Floyd or Ahmaud Arbery, happens in this country. It's every day.
Yep.
Am I going to make it home from my commute? Am I going to make it into work on my commute? Am I going to be okay when I go to the grocery store? Is somebody going to stop me, when I'm pumping gas and, say that they think I was involved in something that I had nothing to do with just because I look a certain way? So he asked this, and I had never heard anything so silent in my life when he stopped talking. And our risk officer, who I have met personally, he's a wonderful person. He's brought in a lot of compelling speakers to talk about things not related to banking at all. He thanked him for the question. He said, admittedly, I don't know, and I'm sorry for that. And I'm sorry you didn't get a chance to ask the question to HR, but we'll make sure that you do get an answer. And if there is a resource, we'll make it available. So yesterday was a really just jarring day in general, starting with that call in the morning, but.
Oh, I want to thank you for sharing, first of all. And I waited, Quin, thanks for your patience on coming on. I didn't want to interrupt Karen's story in the heart of that. Absolutely. I want to bring up, there's two things you said there that I was listening that I think are important for our listeners and viewers right now to think about. And that is, one, there were two people today who I reached out to who are experts on talking about these issues. Both were Black men. Both said, Mike, I would love to come on. Thank you for doing this. I am not in a space where I am able to emotionally have this conversation safely, even in the safest of spaces. And I don't think a lot of individuals who are not Black, myself, can imagine being in a place where we speak out for a living and not feeling safe to speak out because of our identity, not the words we were going to say, because of our identity and what's happening. It shook me when I read those words. When he messaged me back, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I had shivers going through me because it hurt me to think this is silence, and not necessarily against his choice. He may be choosing for his own health to silence, but silence people that I know are outspoken individuals that are passionate about this, that want to make a difference, because there is so much pain. And so when you were saying, you know, maybe he was even afraid to ask the question, I immediately thought of the two of them and thinking, and that's not a sign of weakness at all. That's acknowledging where I am, what I need right now for me to move forward in this conversation. And the other word there that I caught is you said, you know, this is a good company. I have a good job. I'm not a criminal. Mm-hmm. We're not criminals. And Trevor Noah discussed this word about a week ago, and it was before George Floyd case. This was going back to the Arbery case. And so he said that the word criminal is the new black. And that instead of saying someone's black, we say they're criminal. And by saying they're criminal, we can give them less value. We can give them less, that their life means less if we say criminal. So now we have to say I'm not a criminal, because that's the new word. So it was really connected to me there when you said that. And I wanted to pause. I thought about this morning before I reached out to everybody. I thought about the word criminal. We've all been criminals. And I think it's amazing how quickly people forget they've been criminals. They just haven't been caught. Almost everybody in this country has underage drank or experimented with illegal drugs. They've engaged in criminal behavior. A lot of teenagers have gone through property that was trespassing. They've engaged in criminal behavior. A lot of people have sped. That's against the law. Technically, that's criminal behavior. But it's amazing how we want to devalue another human being when the word criminal is put to them versus ourselves, and how quickly there's conviction there. So I want to thank you for all of that you brought up there in that conversation. By the way, we have a lot of people with comments here jumping in, so I want to make sure all of you, Kelly, Quinn, Karen, can react to those. And some people are talking directly on certain cases here, right? So here we have the case of George Floyd. You know, why did the police, they were within a cell phone, within the powers that be of the workouts, the details. I think we're going to get into that. I think we have to get into that. I think if we hide from these conversations, that's part of the problem. So there's that comment. We have people saying hi to some of you on the panel. I love that. We also have Barry here saying the right panel on the right topic for this day. I was raised in rural Appalachia, a lower income family. White privilege hurts all of us. We must face our century-old presumptuous. Oh, I'm bad with English here. Presumptuous challenge to my vocabulary. I appreciate that. And I'm going to make sure we try to bring in those comments. Let's go back to the first one. The case in Minneapolis. We're now talking about George Floyd. We'll start there because I said to start this. This wasn't about one case. This is about a history. This is about a feeling that I don't have to walk down the street with because of hundreds of years, not because of 5 years, 10 years, or 20 years. So let's go down that conversation there. The George Floyd, what do you think people are now missing? Because I think the conversation is, we all know it's changing today already. There seems to be a new focus today.
Yeah.
So Kelly, I'll let you jump in there. You're jumping in.
I think what people are missing is that this is not new, right? So, you know, we see George Floyd, we see Ahmaud Arbery, we see all of these other things that are on TV, and this is what we get up in arms about, right? We all of a sudden like, oh my God, this is so horrible. But what we really need to look at is what's happening behind the scenes every single day that allows an officer to be so emboldened to have his knee on the neck of a human being and being told that he's murdering this human being and have his hand in his pocket nonchalantly on video like he's posing for a picture, right? That's what we're missing. We're missing how did we get here? How did we get to the place where this is okay. Right. And so, yes, we can get up in arms, and yes, you know, we have people get on social media and like, oh, this is so terrible and this is awful. But I just put out a post on my social media saying, white people, what do you say when you're at work or out in public and somebody has their knee on the neck of a black or brown person and there is no video and there is no light and there is no news? What do you do and say then? Because when we don't say those things in those moments, that's what allows the Ahmaud Arbery's, the George Floyd, that's what allows it to happen in the public. And so that's where we have to start. That's the connection that's missing. What we're doing in the dark. What are we doing about what's happening in the dark? What are we doing about the Amy Coopers of the world?
Yeah. And there's a whole, right, there's that conversation. And so, Kelly, some people are not aware of who Amy Cooper is. They might have heard the case briefly, like when you say, so could you tell everybody the Amy Cooper, because that's a different one than George Floyd, but obviously It's all connected.
So Amy Cooper was the white woman who was in Central Park. She had her dog. It was not leashed. And there's a law or regulation or whatever it is in New York that your dogs need to be leashed. There was a black man who is a bird watcher who was in the park watching birds and asked her to put her dog on the leash. And I guess that offended her in some way. And so she decided that she was going to call the police. And the thing about what Amy Cooper did and what the men who killed Ahmaud Arbery, what has happened is that white people have decided to weaponize police. They've decided to weaponize 911 because for white people, and obviously I'm talking about white people as a category, not every white person in the world, but white people have decided that police are for their protection and for the discipline of black people. And so when they feel that, you know, you're telling me to do something that I don't feel like doing, then they're like, I'm going to call the police. And so she apologized, quote unquote, I'll say she apologized, but she wasn't apologizing because she felt bad or she did the wrong thing. She was apologizing because she was getting dragged through the mud for her white privilege. Right. And so we know that she intended to do it because before she even got on the phone call, she said, I'm going to call the police and tell them that an African-American man is attacking me. And then while she's on the phone, she ratchets up her act of, oh my God, right? And so if he had not videotaped that and they heard that on the phone, then what would happen to him? And so that's where, you know, all of these, but those are things that we see on a daily basis. We see when, you know, somebody is a black person is standing in line in first class on a flight, and a white person walks in front of them and says, oh, this is a line for first class. And everybody else is standing there. Nobody says anything, right? You see that when you're in your organization and you say, you know, some black person is going for a promotion and they're like, they're not a good fit. And we know what good fit means, right? And we don't say anything. All of those things lead to these things.
Quin, you look like you're about to jump in. So
Yeah. So the Central Park lady, what she was attempting to do was she wanted to put him in his place.
Mm-hmm.
Her thing was, I'm going to do exactly what I want, when I want, and who the heck are you to tell me? So I'm going to call the cops because you need to be put in your place because you don't have the authorization to tell me anything, even if I'm doing something wrong. And that's the issue. People believe that, you know, minorities, and we'll say black people are subservient to them, and we're equal. And we shouldn't have to fight for these equal rights on a daily basis. Yeah. And a lot of times it could be something very simple, you know, like Miss Kelly said, is in, you know, on a flight, but it could be at the grocery store. Because, you know, now we have to social distance and we have to be 6 feet apart. You know, well, I've had people try to run me down in the grocery store, and I'm doing the same thing as you're doing. We're both getting these organic bananas, Karen. So you can go first or I can go first, but we really need to go ahead and get these bananas so that we can both go home and feed our families a healthy meal. You know what I mean? So it can be very small, you know, and right now I'm in Tennessee, so I get the, oh, bless your heart. Come on now.
Yeah. And, you know, you were bringing up what's amazing about the case in New York, Amy Cooper, is she was the criminal. She was the one breaking the law, ironically.
Exactly.
And then what she did was criminal, right? So what's amazing about that whole scene, and when we talked about the word criminal earlier, is that's a prime example of it there, right? There are people saying, how is that not a hate crime? She blatantly, as you said, Kelly, she blatantly says, I'm about to call the police and say a black man is doing this. She was using that language that she knew would incite, right? And it was incredibly intentional. And it's scary stuff. Tony's joined us in the last few minutes too. So
Hey, Tony,
thank you very much for joining us. We've discussed the use of the word criminal, the George Floyd case in Minneapolis. Now we're talking about the Amy Cooper case. The one thing we have not defined, that one of the individuals who was hoping they could be here today but not able to be here today, was how do you even define racism? He had said, Mike, before you go anywhere in the conversation, does your panel agree with what racism even means, so people listening understand where we're all coming from? So I start there. How do we define racism?
I'm sorry, I'm having internet connection issues, so I missed part of the question. So
okay, how do we define racism, Tony?
Yes.
I mean,
Yes.
I don't even know if that's the right word to define.
Yeah.
Because, when you deal with racism, you're dealing with something that's institutional. And I think that's a disconnect for a lot of people. I think you have to start off with words like bias, which have to do more with individual prejudices and the fact that, in reality, we talk about Amy Cooper. The fascinating thing about Amy Cooper is people want to quickly label that as unconscious bias when there was honestly nothing unconscious about it, right? She clearly knew what she was doing. She knew the power that she wielded, and she executed on that power. Whereas, many times when we talk about truly unconscious bias, it has to do with how the brain is wired and thinking systems and things of that nature. But the fact that we all, I want to kind of do this the right way. It's true that we all have biases. It's not true that we all have the power to do something with those biases to the detriment of other people. And that's really where the conversation breaks down, because people want to quickly go, well, we all have biases. Okay, we do all have biases. But if I have a bias, and let me give you an example of this Amy Cooper thing. So I live in Harlem. Now, you probably have a picture of what Harlem is, but Harlem has become incredibly gentrified. In fact, I live in a building with 12 condos, and I am one of 2 black families in the center of Harlem, right? Right as this COVID-19 thing starts, I'm walking my dog. I come into the building, and we're waiting for the elevator, and I'm checking my email, and the door opens, and I didn't notice my dog starts lunging at the elevator because there's another dog in. Now, backstory, my dog was attacked by another dog, and so he has a fight or flight response. He's a fear response, and because he's on a leash, he can't run, so he gets aggressive. I catch him way before he gets to the other person's dog, but now the other person's, panicking, what's going on? I said, hey, I apologize. And then again, it's the same. It goes from what's going on to what the F. I said, look, I'm really sorry. I'm trying to be patient. He goes, and then he goes to the next step was, does the building know that you have this dog? Now, that's the parallel of, are you involved in some criminal activity? It's the exact same parallel. Does the building know you have the dog? I looked at him and said, of course the building knows I have the dog. He goes, well, I'm going to call them and I'm going to find out. And that's the parallel now of calling the authorities. And I snapped. I didn't snap, I turned, because I knew where this could go. And he walked out of the building. My dog's barking at him. I followed him out the building. And now he's scared because my dog wants to go after him. And I clearly have intentions with him. And I said, here's the deal. Don't ever threaten me again. Period. What you are doing now is you're using a third party to threaten me. And that's where we start to go from bias to whether you want to label it racism or any other word, the ability to harm other people because of your biases. And so I think it's, I'm sorry?
To put it into action.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can put it into action. And that's what the thing is. People will say, well, all people are biased. Black people are racist too. Well, technically black people can't be racist because they don't have the systematic power to do it. But also, I think we sometimes have to look at the differences as to the sources of bias. If you say that someone is aggressive towards another person because they've been victimized by that person for a long period of time, that's different than if someone just has a natural tendency to be aggressive to someone. And I think that there's a lot of nuances in this conversation that have to be broken down. The danger in generalizing it is you give people just enough information that they can hurt other people.
But I think also that, you know, when we talk about racism, you are talking about oppressing another race just because of their race, right? So what we see in this country daily is the weaponizing of Black skin. And so like Tony talks about bias, and then you talk about crossing the line. And when I train on unconscious bias, what I talk about is it's the intention, right? So the difference between unconscious bias and racism is your intent, and whether you intend consciously to cause harm. And though there is an intention piece, we can't lose sight of the fact that whether it's unconscious or conscious, the impact is the same. And so whether I'm, you know, whether it's my unconscious bias that causes me to stereotype you, or it's my racism that causes me to stereotype you and act in some way, the impact on me is the same. And so I think that's where we have to really get to. And like Tony says, yes, we all have it, but that's no excuse, right? That doesn't give you the right to then do what you want to do with it and to weaponize that. And, you know, it's really interesting because, you know, I've seen all these things come out every day, and there are days where I just like, if I see a picture that I know is going to be something police brutality, I flip past it really quickly. And the reason why is because I have a son who was a victim of police brutality. I have a son who was told by a police officer that I will shoot you, throw you out in the bush, and nobody will ever find you. Right. So for me, my brain, I believe that my brain has shut down that trauma so that I cannot relive those things. And so I have to bypass them a lot. And then I have to come back to them and then be able to speak about them, or to be able to react. So sometimes I see people and they, you know, they're so hurt and they're crying, and I can't cry over those things. Right. I cannot cry over these things, because when we have to, like, my brain has stopped me from being able to do that. Doesn't mean I'm not angry, but it allows me, I think, to then be rational in my response and try to ask questions as opposed to react on my emotions. Because if I react on my emotions, that might not be so pretty. And so you know, we see these things. There's only so much trauma that people can take every single day. And so we see, you know, people acting out, and we see the riots, and, you know, people are like upset about the riots. And I'm not saying people should be looting and burning stuff down, but stop questioning the response. And I want you to go back when you're talking about what's missing. Let's talk about the cause. Like, how did we get here to the point where where people are burning down stuff, where people are putting themselves and others in harm's way because they want to be heard? And I think that's where we have to start these conversations. And listen, George Floyd will be off the news in a week, if a week. Right. And then we'll all go back to doing what we were doing. And that's why I think it's so very important that we have these conversations, not just in these moments, but what is it that we're doing every single day when we see these acts, when we see the microaggressions, when we see racism, when we see bias, what are we doing then? And it's not okay for you to just call me up and be like, Kelly, oh, I'm so really sorry that happened to you. No, I need you to speak up. Right? We talk about allyship, and everybody talks about there being woke, but that's great that your eyes are open, but if your mouth is shut, you're useful in the struggle, right? And we need to speak up. We need to move from allyship to advocacy. Advocacy means taking action.
Mm-hmm. And you're right. People are scared to even speak up, forget about take action, right? Not even to get to that level of saying the wrong word. And I think what you said something so powerful there, Kelly, and several of you have reflected the same and shared the same opinion, which is the differences of intention. And I think that's so important for people who are not Black to understand, because if you are afraid that if I speak up and say the wrong thing, I'll be labeled as racist, you will never say anything because you don't know what could offend another human being. I don't know what I don't know. So when I sent out the message to all of you today and to a few others, I was scared to death when I hit the send button.
But you know, Mike, it's funny that you say that, because another friend who we know, a mutual friend, did a post on Instagram, and she was talking about, like, she wanted to say something, and she said, I'm afraid, people may think that I'm saying the wrong thing. And I responded to her and I said, listen to me. I would rather you have good intentions and say something and make a mistake than to say nothing at all. When I did my TEDx, one of the things I said is, inaction is indifference, and in your silence lies complicity. So I would rather you say the wrong thing and mean well than to shut your mouth.
Well, and that was huge. That was the fear that I would do more harm, right? It's not that I would be, whether I'd, be biased. It's whether I would actually do harm with my words and how I write a message, because the message was very, you all know, it was very upfront and said, I don't know the answers. I want to listen. And I'm only inviting Black individuals into this discussion. For everybody else can be part of it, communicating as far as watching, but I don't want this to be overwhelmed. I want to be a listener. But that fear before I hit the first send and before anybody responded was even higher, right? Because, oh no, have I done harm? Because my thing is don't do harm. And I think it's what you just said was really important for all of us to hear. If you're not fearing that, maybe worry, right? But if you are fearing that, that means your intention is in the right place. You're trying to do the right thing. And maybe that's a sign to trust and say something. Say something.
Yeah.
Mike, you said something to me a long time ago, about 20 years ago, when I was working for you. I don't know if you remember this, but it was when we were DJing.
I'm having a moment of
And I was nervous about the first gig. This is somebody's wedding. This is the day they're going to remember for the rest of their lives. I was nervous to go out and perform. And you said, that's good. Because if you're not nervous, that means you don't care. And to this day, I carry that with me. Like, I'm glad that you were nervous this morning. I'm glad that you also got a positive response, but I'm glad that you have the consciousness to think about things in that way, and that you're thoughtful about it. So thanks.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you, Karen. But I also don't want this to be
okay. So
Mike did the right thing here, because I don't want that. Yeah.
Thing. And I think in general, what Kelly and Karen have just shared really speaks to a greater population. It's ironic that in these situations, the victim is the one who wants to talk, and the other group is the one that's afraid to talk. And I think that that's that's something that has to be addressed, that there's got to be, number one, the acknowledgement that we as Black people are smart enough and compassionate enough to understand the difference between someone who wants to have a sincere conversation and someone who is gaslighting. And I think, this is certainly not about you, Mike, but I think that because I also am in the same space as Kelly, we know each other. And, quite often you get defensive responses of, I'm afraid to have the conversation, but you have them as more of a defense mechanism than as a real legitimate fear in some of these workshops. I'm sure others in this group have seen that. So I think that that's something we have to talk about, because, what that does is that places even more of the pressure and onus on us as the victims you think about this. I literally, as a Black man, and I have two young adult Black men who are sons, each of them are 6'4". We spend the majority of our days when we navigate white spaces trying to look safe. You have to. It is when Kelly talked about what happened to her son, the reason that this has such a visceral response among Black people is because all of us can talk about times where, look, I've been pulled over in the middle of Georgia and told my car was stolen, and the plan was for me to disappear off the face of the earth. That was just, and if it wasn't for the fact that my white boss was in the car and it was his business car was with me, I would not exist today. That's just, that is a common experience among Black people. And so the fact that we really walk around on guard and sometimes in fear, making effort to appear and be safe, is a very unhealthy burden that we carry.
Mm-hmm.
And it also becomes a burden that we carry in these conversations that is just not, it's not a realistic thing that we should have to do. So I think that there's part of it that's that. And I think there's also another part, we're going to talk about emotions, that needs to be addressed. Is one of the barriers to us getting any progress during conversations is sometimes, and I'm going to use the categorization that Kelly used also, this is not all white people, but often white people feel the wrong emotions. So I'll share a story. I was in college and I was at a really nice steak restaurant with one of my best friends, who's one of my best friends to this day. I have no idea how we had steakhouse money, but we did that day. And, you know, he's white, I'm black. We were sitting in this restaurant. It wasn't very crowded. And somebody over by the bar was singing. And I remember afterwards, one of the waiters, he was off duty. He just left. He walked up to him. He had been drinking. He said, "So are you going to sing too?" And it totally caught me off guard. I did not expect that, right? Which is probably the best thing for both of us, that it caught me off guard. I blinked out for about 5 to 7 seconds, because when I came to, I noticed that I had my steak knife in my hand. I didn't have the steak yet. So I clearly didn't come to with the right intentions, but I froze long enough that nothing bad happened. And then I remember other white bystanders coming up to me, you know, "I'm so sorry that happened." And you know, we can get to the bystander effect. But what I noticed in that day and in almost every interaction since, the prevailing emotion that is felt when white people see this or experience is embarrassment and shame. And that's the wrong emotion. That is a self-centered response. That is a response that only leads to a defensive nature, which is exactly what Amy Cooper did, right? She was embarrassed, she was shamed, and she had to do something with that negative emotion. And instead of placing it on herself, which would have been the healthy thing to do, she found a victim to project that on, and it turned into, you know, her having bad repercussions from it. And I think what people have to do in these situations is look and say, okay, I'm having the wrong emotion. Why am I embarrassed? Why do I feel shame? You know, why is it that when, you know, something happens racially, I have to internalize that in the same way that it's expected that black people have to take account for whenever someone black does something wrong? I need to change this emotion to either indignancy or empathy, because what I'm doing right now is only going to cause more harm. It is the wrong emotion. And until we start dealing with those types of internal parts of it, every time we have this conversation, because the conversation is going to get extremely uncomfortable, that wrong emotion is going to pop up, and it's going to make other defense mechanisms come up. And we're going to have whataboutisms, and, you know, what about Chicago and black on black crime? And, you know, there's two sides to this, and all these other things will happen instead of healthy dialogue.
And I think when they, and I think what happens too is like when white people have that emotion, what it does then is put the burden on the black person to make you feel comfortable. We're always having to make white people feel comfortable. And so we can't tend to the trauma that we're facing. We can't tend to, you know, the anger that we're feeling, because now I have to switch roles and I have to become your caretaker. I have to make sure that you feel comfortable and that you feel okay and that you're all right, so that I then don't now offend you. So then it becomes, oh, I'm the angry black woman or the angry black man, and therefore play into the original stereotype that got us there in the first place. So I think Tony's really, that's a really insightful thing, that it isn't about you, right? So if I talk about white privilege, first, we got to accept that there is white privilege. You got to accept that you have white privilege. Now, what are we going to do about that? How are we going to do that? What are we, you know, so it's not all white people, but the white people who are not that, it's not enough for you to not be that. You must then step up, and when your other counterparts are that, then you need to say something about it. You need to do something about it. You don't get to sit in silence because you're a quote unquote good white person, right? So, you know, and then you need to remove the burden from us to make you feel comfortable. It's interesting that, you know, we're talking about and how we train, and Tony trains on the same subject. And in all of this with COVID, I've been thinking about, you know, how do we do this differently? And these types of things, I can train you all day long and tell you what unconscious bias is and tell you by the numbers and tell you all this stuff. But these are really things, and you know, I'm working on this these are things that you have to have conversations about. These are things that you have to put people in the space of feeling and experiencing so that they understand. And so I'm so glad that you're having this conversation, Mike, because these topics are not ones that are just, okay, let me do a PowerPoint slide and we get past it. And, you know, we always talk about, oh, we need to move past. We cannot move past. We have to move through, because when you move past, you're just like going around and ignoring it and trying to leave it behind. We cannot leave it behind. It keeps coming with us unless we do something about it.
Yeah, and I want to thank both of you. The point you made there, Tony, about the fact that you shouldn't have, and I agree 100%, you shouldn't have to comfort the white person so I can feel safe asking the question. I should trust you, especially, I mean, look at this. I was reaching out to all of you because I trust you, right? I did not open this to everyone in the world. My gut should have said, because of who you are, I should feel safe having this conversation. And yet you're absolutely 100% correct. It was my ego going, I don't want to do the wrong thing. That's ego, right? I don't want to do the wrong thing is ego versus trust you, which is giving to others, right? Mm-hmm. And leading with love and respect for others. Thank you for bringing it up, because I think that is, for me, that's an eye opener to recognize, to trust humanity. And to not trust those who are the victim is insane. I would never do it in sexual violence, which is the area I work in. I would never do that. So why would I do any differently in other areas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's like drop the mic, right? Yeah. Why? Right. You know, we don't question, and I don't like to think of being a victim, but we don't question, quote unquote, other people who are victimized in that way, right? I was having a conversation with someone today, and I was saying, what was the first reaction that you had? He's a white man. And I said, what was the first reaction that you had when you saw this video of George Floyd? And he said, you know, for me, I'm in Philadelphia, but he asked, well, what else happened? And that's the thing, that when these things happen, we're always, well, what did they do? And what else happened? And what, you know, why? Why is that? This is like maybe very random, but think about if somebody had seen, if that was not George Floyd, but a dog, and you saw somebody with their knee in the neck of a dog, and you saw that the dog was struggling and the dog couldn't breathe, we would be so freaking outraged over that, right? Because in this country, the lives of animals are even more important than the lives of Black men and the lives of Black women, right? We would be so outraged by that. That person would already be in jail. Why isn't this man in jail? I don't care that he's a police officer. Why isn't he in jail? They keep talking about, oh, we need to gather evidence. Go tell all the people that are sitting in jail right now that oh, we need more evidence. No, right? And so there's this, beyond all of that, beyond what we're just seeing on TV, there's so many, there's such an underbelly that needs to be addressed, that we do these conversations, we have these conversations very surface, because what we're dealing with is that one particular thing. So this week, we're dealing with George Floyd. Last week, we were dealing with Ahmaud Arbery. However long, you know, we have the list, it's going around on Facebook of what we can and we can't do anything. We just can't even live. Living while Black is a crime in this country. We have to address that. Stop addressing these individual things. We have to address the systemic racism in this country, even just the way that things are handled. The guy who murdered those two people the other day and kidnapped his girlfriend, in the news, they titled him the college student who killed two people, blah, blah. The college student? Are you serious? They arrested him. He's sitting on the ground, handcuffed. Nobody's on top of him, and they're feeding him water from a water bottle. Yet, George Floyd, they supposedly passed a bad check or bad counterfeit money, and he's dead, right? We see these things, and it's like, it's so infuriating because people act like they don't see it. It's like that whole thing about I don't see color. When people act like they don't see stuff, it gives them an excuse to not to have to do anything about it. And so that's one of the things we have to do too, is not allow people to get away with, oh, I really didn't realize that. No, you did. You realized it, but it didn't bother you, or you felt it wasn't your responsibility, or it didn't happen in your household. And so therefore it didn't affect you. And when it doesn't affect you, you don't feel a responsibility to do anything about it.
Yeah. And you both brought up the idea of people adding on the yeah, buts, right? The yeah, but now the rioting, the yeah, but what happened beforehand, which doesn't matter, because we could play this worst case scenario and say any of these people, let's say they did commit the most heinous crime, because the example you gave there, Kelly, of the college killer, did commit the heinous crime and was not treated this way. We believe in this country that criminals have rights, right? That's supposed to be a ground concept. So the what if shouldn't actually matter in any of these cases that we're referring to here. And this was a handcuffed individual in this case of George Floyd. So if somebody's going to resisting arrest, with handcuffs on the ground, literally you could just walked away. And where's the person going? Right. So, it's just mind boggling. I don't even want to get into that because that's the whole what if. What it does, interestingly, though, is the new distraction is today's, which is the riots. And now it's all about the riots. Right. And what is good is this doing? And how is that getting justice? And I wanted to scream, this isn't about justice. People are not ransacking Target or rioting because of justice. This is called pent up anger, frustration, pain. And I've never been there to know what that's like to get to that place. I don't have a right to say that I could never be there. I don't know that that's true at all. But what people are doing is going, well, that's going to now be the conversation. Yeah. The writing is going to be the conversation. What do we need to understand? What should we be discussing about that? Because look how quick it took before we got there.
Yeah. Anybody want to jump in
first on that one?
I was just going to say that's just the normal mode of operation, right? To deflect. That's what we do, is deflect. And like I said earlier, I'm not saying that it's okay for them to be looting, but we can be mad about the looting, but we need to continue to be mad about what caused them to be out there looting, right? So what I've found about the news is that they're very myopic, right? They can only focus on one thing. They can't talk and chew gum at the same time. Right. So all of a sudden now it's about, oh, they're burning down the police station and they're doing this. And okay, but why are they burning down the police station? I'm not saying it's justified, but why are they doing that? What caused them to do that in the first place? And the people in Minneapolis are telling you, like, listen, in Minnesota, this has been going on for a long time. We keep trying to tell you, in Jamaica, I'm Jamaican, we have a stand, pressure bust pipe. And so at some point, if you don't do something about it, it's going to blow up in your face. And that's what's happening.
We are getting a few questions. Some of you can see the comments. So the comments previously were highs, but now we're getting questions. So I'm going to throw these questions up there. Two very different questions we have here. We have Dan saying, how do we help people understand they need to do more than take that phone out and get video? Now, I want to be very clear. The George Floyd case, there were people standing there saying he is dying, and they have interviewed those people. And they're like, if I step in, I get killed. I get shot. So I'm doing everything I can right to the point I can without losing my life by saying to those police officers, he's dying right now. You're killing him right now. And you can hear this in the video. Bystanders are trying to do that. So I think you actually need both. Now, Will Smith had a quote this week that's gone viral, which is racism has not gotten worse. We have footage now. That the difference is we're filming it where we didn't have the proof. And ironically, in this case, both the video were important and the bystanders, which I think they were both in this case. I think the person filming was one of them yelling. So it was an and, not a or.
Right.
Let me jump on that one. So the Will Smith quote is actually from a couple of years ago, and I don't fully agree with it. I think that there is this idea that, we have shined a light on a problem that's been there for a long period of time. Here's why I say it's gotten worse. It started in 2006 when the Department of Justice was warning the public that white supremacists have infiltrated the police departments and the criminal justice system. There are plenty of reports by the DOJ that highlight that. And so that it was a strategic attempt to put white supremacists in positions of police uniforms and as attorneys and judges. And so, that in and of itself is a big deal. I've been going so many places with this, to deal with the fact that we are now in a situation where we have a government that has empowered people to be more overtly active in their racism and in their xenophobia and in all of these, because it's not just race, it is all of these things. You have to keep that into context. So the majority of people who post that Will Smith quote are not Black people. I just think that has to be stated. And that statement was a few years ago also.
Well, thank you for that.
At some point, I would like to circle back to this riot, because part of what is happening, if you don't mind me doing this.
I know. In fact, I was going to put one of the comments up. Some of you are seeing it, and I can see that we need to address it.
I don't see the comment. Where are the comments?
It's coming. You're going to see it at the bottom of the screen here. It's
okay.
It's coming back the way that we discussed before in this comment. I know this person, and so I think it's important for us to discuss this. I have a very strong reaction to this because of one of the people who did not choose to come on today because they needed to be in a safe space. They said, I'm starting to believe that some people think that buildings and neighborhoods are more important than my life.
Ooh. Indian.
And when we look at the statement that this is almost worse, the backlash is almost worse, the burning of Target and all. No, that man's life, nothing is worse than the life of a human being being lost. A building burning down, TV and racial, and this did not reveal racial tensions. This exposed situations. It didn't create them. But the idea that his life, that now what's happening could somehow be worse than his life. It's incomprehensible. And I'm not saying that Sam meant that, but that's the message that can be heard in that. And that's what we talked about before. We have to be aware of how it affects others, not just me, right? The riots affect me. Target affects me, right? That potentially versus the people in the community that lost someone.
Okay, so let's step by step this thing, because I think there's a lot of information that's not been made public about what actually is going on. And in a moment, is it okay if I share my screen as well?
Sure, if it'll let you do that, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So first, let's start off with the fact that after the death, there was a peaceful protest, right? It was an absolute peaceful protest. And how was that peaceful protest dealt with? It was dealt with police attacking the protesters with rubber bullets and with tear gas. Okay, so let's start with that. So we don't think that this just erupted, because this has erupted in a way that's very unnatural if you look at how riots actually start. So then there's another protest, and this is where I want to share screen. If it, it really does not want me to do this.
It's not always the easiest to do it on this format.
Because there's a video that came out last night. So last night I ended up on a 1-hour conversation dealing with social justice. And
Tony, if it helps, just since we're doing this live, if you want to private chat me the link to something, I could share screen potentially. So if it's not letting you, if that helps.
Yeah, I'm having a problem with this. So I'm going to send you the link, because what has started to come out is that the protesters did not start this riot. I think that is the part that there's another part of this that's not being talked about. And so that's why now this video is starting to become more and more viral. Let me just.
Is that the one with the person who broke the windows, Tony?
Yes.
And they're thinking it might have been a cop.
Yeah, well, there's mixed stories about whether it was a police officer, whether it was
Just a
white
provocateur.
supremacist.
Yeah.
Apparently the police officer's girlfriend or wife has actually said it was him. So
yeah, and we have somebody jumping in. We have somebody jumping
questionable.
in that is talking about the fact that she knows someone in the neighborhood, and they still are having peaceful protests right now. We see that right now in the comments, but they're only showing right now the rioting, and because that's the myopic view you talked about.
Right, because they want to change the narrative. That's not good. Peaceful is not good TV. And if they're peaceful, then there's no what about, or there's no changing the story to say, oh, this is worse than what happened, right? So there has to be this change in the narrative.
Yeah. And, this is also the story that was coming out in Ferguson, because Boots on the ground in Ferguson said this is not what was really going on. This is the exact same story that was coming out in Baltimore. And in fact, there was a lot of, when you really broke it down, it didn't even make sense for Baltimore protesters to be rioting in the area that they were accused of rioting. I don't know that this is that simple ever, but this video, I put it in the comments. You can kind of pull that up.
Yeah, so that's what I'm going to try to do now. So I'll try to do a
screen, or
we'll try to. Yeah, I'm going to try to do a
this
share
one's labeled.
screen.
It's the assumption that it's actually a police officer. I don't think that that's necessarily proven, although there's evidence towards it. But I do think, when people start seeing the entire stream of evidence, right?
So I'm playing it while you're talking here.
And so breaking news, apparently the officer's been arrested.
So that person right there with the umbrella, all covered up, is an officer?
Yeah, and
they're saying that. We're not sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And so what you see is, and there's a longer video, and even as you play that, the protesters are confronting this person because that's the auto zone that had the windows broken. And so, the protesters are trying to stop him, and, they're following him. So you see they stopped him. He also painted on the door before that. You can kind of see it on the red door where it says free stuff.
Right. Oh my goodness. Yeah,
this thing did not just happen from a natural standpoint when you start to look at how this thing all pulls down. So now the question is, who does this and who benefits from it? Because there's clearly as I think it was Kelly mentioned for a moment, the distraction of it, you have to also put that in play. So when you really look at how during protests, how things naturally develop, there's a reason this happens so fast in such an unnatural way. And the fact that, it's ironic, Gil Scott-Heron had a song, "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." I don't think that he could have predicted social media, right? Because the media would never have televised this thing on their own. And yet now people, boots on the ground, are able to spread this information out in a way that's not filtered by people with sponsors.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's powerful video. And it goes back to what we said before about the fact that without that video, right? We keep having to say without that video. And that's so sad that we need video to believe.
But but Mike, it's even more sad because you have video and they still don't believe, right? So we've seen all the cases where we have video and they see exactly what's happening and they're like, no, that's not what you saw. It's like, don't believe your lying eyes, right? So it's not even so much that the video helps in these situations, because even in this situation, they're like, oh, we need more video. We need more witnesses. What more do you need? Like, what more do you need? So, video, like you said earlier, video is amplifying what happens every day around this country. But it's not changing anything. And that's the problem, that we're not changing. We have these conversations. So just on the news, it's saying that the officer involved in the death and Mr. Floyd's death has been arrested. And, in the Black community, when they get arrested, we're like, yeah, okay, whatever, because that's not justice, right? Because then there's a jury and then the jury is like, yeah, no, that's not what was on video. That's not what I saw. And then, they get off. So, it's a frustrating, infuriating existence. And if if we allow it on a daily basis, like the two gentlemen who would not come on, right? If we allow that to consume us on a daily basis, we are going to be destroyed. And I think for the people who are doing this, for the people who perpetuate this, that is the intention. It is a destruction and the degradation of Black people, Black men, Black women. You know, we're talking about George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, but, you know, we had Breonna Taylor who was killed in her home the other day, you know, and people, and it's interesting because when the women get killed, when Black women get killed, there's not as much of an outcry. And so that's a whole nother issue, right? So we are the mothers and the sisters and the aunts of these Black men. But when we are the victims, when we are the ones who are being accosted and hurt and murdered, there isn't that same outcry for us. And so, go ahead, Quinn.
There's no outcry, but you know what? People want the responsibility of African American women to be super duper forgiving. We have to forgive this person. You know, don't worry about it. No, we are hurt too, because these are our husbands, these are our brothers, you know, these are our fathers. And then that goes back to our family cycle. You know, we are raising children without their fathers who may have been incarcerated, who may have had some issues with the law, you know, and I want to kind of cycle back to where you were talking about the recording. Well, you know what, the recording, you know, maybe it used to be a deterrent, but now it's not. Now people want to record so they can be famous 5 or 10 minutes for that Insta or that Facebook famous for a minute. You know what I mean? Remember the lady who a couple summers ago called the police on the kids, on the Black children who were doing a lemonade stand? You know, a couple summers ago was that. Then it was the African-American little girl who went in Houston, went to a pool party with her friends, and her friends lived in a predominantly white neighborhood, and the police officer slammed her to the ground as if she was a grown man, just like him. We don't hear anything about that. You know, then the Breonna Taylor, you know, I don't know if it was Taylor or not, but, you know, we don't know a lot about her because it comes and it goes, you know. So I think these days, sometimes we're all about making other people comfortable. Yeah. You know, I have great friends and they say, oh, well, I don't see color. And I have to remind them, I need you to see color.
Right.
If you value me and you value our love and our friendship, I need you to see me as a Black woman, because that is how everybody else sees me. And that is how I have to navigate through the world. I'm raising 2 Black girls, Black daughters, and I have to, hey, think about this. Think about where you're going. Keep your head on the swivel. You know, my daughter's in the working world, you know, and she's like, well, Mama, you know, people treat me as if I shouldn't be in certain spaces. And I say, you know what? That's their problem. It's not yours. Yeah. You have every right to be there.
Yeah. It's funny. Like when my son's friends call me, they know there's a rule. The first thing that you must say to me if you call me is Jordan is okay. They have to. They must say to me, Jordan is okay. They can't say anything else before they say that, right? How sad is that, right? That is the existence, right? That I have, that I need you to assure me that nobody has harmed my child before I can even talk to you. And then I know in one of the comments, I always like to make sure that we talk about these things, but we also give actionable things. And one of the comments was about, you know, so what do we do? And we're talking about like the recording of these incidents. Keep recording. I would never tell anyone to stop recording, but record for the purposes of gathering evidence so it can help, not record for purposes of entertainment, right? And so I have a whole thing about the 4 C's, and you need to connect, you need to create a distraction, you need to call for help, and you need to, you know, to capture the incident. And all of that has to be towards, number 1, diffusing the situation, and number 2, gathering the evidence. Right, I'm a former public defender, and I'm an employment lawyer, defense trial attorney, and so I'm always thinking about what is it in regards to evidence. And so we have to be thankful that these people have their cameras out and that they're quick on the draw to be able to record these things. But we need to record them not for the purpose of just putting them on Facebook or Instagram or Snapchat or whatever. We need to make sure that we're gathering the evidence, because that's going to hopefully help with doing this. So, you know, 1, connect with the people. And so that's what they were doing. You saw that, right? C is connect with the people. And that's what the people around were doing. Like, hey, this is what's happening. And letting Mr. Floyd know, listen, we can't jump in because we're going to suffer the same fate or worse. But we see you. We hear you. We're here for you, right? Create a distraction. They tried to create the distraction. They tried to, to intervene in some way. And then people were calling for help, which is another C. That's the third C. And then fourth, they were capturing the incident. And so thank goodness, the young lady who is totally traumatized, who captured the part with the four of them on him by the car, she captured that in such a way that you could really see. You could tell that she wasn't capturing it so that it could be entertainment, like, oh, look what I saw, right? And so as long as people do those four things, you can use that in any situation, whether it's work, whether it's home, whether it's at the grocery store, at the airport, wherever. Just remember to connect, create a distraction, call for help, and capture the incident.
Yeah, great points, both of you. I think going back a little bit, I think of MLK's speech, about we live in two different Americas. And the fact that, when I was younger, I always thought, well, if people saw what we go through, they would get it. And as I've grown older and as, from Rodney King to Trayvon Martin to Tamir Rice, was that people only have an empathy of the eyes, not an empathy of the heart, right? And until that they can feel it they have to see it to believe it. They can't just hear it. We can tell them the stories they don't necessarily get, that we're in two different worlds because it doesn't happen to them. And I think that that's really important. I think, what Kelly just said is really important if you're in that situation. I think for the average person who may not be in that extreme of a situation, number one, you all have a circle of influence that you can impact. And it takes time and effort, but you can intervene with your own friends to help change their perspective. And as you do that, you start to have a viral impact. The thing about intervention, I do believe that white interveners are treated differently than black interveners. I think that that's also got to be considered. But is there a risk? Of course there's a risk. I have to be honest. I did a Facebook Live this morning. I think you were on it for a little bit, Mike, because you reached out to me. And we had what appears to have been a troll inciting a riot in my Facebook Live. And now I've got some friends doing some research because I think it was actually law officials. And there's reasons I believe that. It's not just some random thing. So there's always repercussions, unfortunately, if you're going to try to create equality, because certain people benefit from inequality. But working your circles, I think having conversations that are going to be uncomfortable with people who are not like you, and fighting the defensive, shame, wrong emotions so that you can actually sit back and go, okay, you know what? This has never happened to me, but that doesn't mean it's never happened to them. And I need to learn to be more empathetic and understand that we do live in multiple countries, I think also plays a big role. And then, Kelly's 4 C's are great because, it's really not always about a police officer. And just for clarification, there were 4 police officers on him, not one. Right. That needs to be dealt with too. But it's not always a police officer, but it's, what about that person who is making the racial or homophobic jokes at work and making people uncomfortable? What about the hiring official who always seems to hire the same demographic every single time, even though they're qualified candidates? It is the interceding in those things that have, a less of a physical risk. They have the same emotional risk, but less of a physical risk, that allow people to have an impact in their actual circle of influence. Because I don't expect everybody to kind of hop up into a situation and put on their superhero cape and say, okay, I'm going to intervene. Now, if it's me, I want you to, don't get me wrong. I don't want you filming. I want you to, pick up a brick or something. But, I do think that we also underestimate the fact that, there are plenty of good people who are misguided. And there are plenty of other good people who are around them who can help them. And the truth is, there are people who will hear the message differently from Mike than they will from Quin. And so we need to have everybody speaking out and giving those voices so that we can, so that we don't have to worry about using the 4 C's because we're preventing it before it actually happens.
Yeah, you brought up some things there, Tony. I want to dive into a little bit there, which is, making sure that we're using our voice when we have opportunities to. I know people who disconnect from friends who make comments that it could appear to be biased or racist, and said other white people who say, I'm not going to let them in my world, so I'm going to unfriend them because I don't need that energy. And I've always, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but I've always questioned it because I thought if we disconnect with them, we have no chance of opening a light or opening a door. And we're actually not helping end racism because we're just walking away from the racist versus this person we know trying to engage. And I get it that they're also protecting their energy and their emotional space. I get that. I just wonder if you can't say you're doing that in social justice, though, in my mind, because you've given up on justice or at least on a social influence. But I don't know, maybe that could be a bias of mine. I don't know. What do you feel about that when you see white people going, well, when somebody is acts this way, I unfriend them, I undo this, when we're the one that has the voice that can be heard differently, unfortunately?
Well, I think you can't save everybody. That's my whole point. And maybe there's something when someone decides that I'm just going to disengage from that person, there's probably some other history of that and not getting through to them, and just at some point understanding that we can't change everyone. We cannot make everyone non-racist, right? And so sometimes to protect your own well-being, your own mental health, your own sanity, yes, you have to just disengage, right? Because I've done that. This happened in this last week in one of our groups, and somebody said something and I read it and I was reading the comments and I commented, and I just said, you know what, I'm going to unfriend this person because I don't have the mental capacity to engage in that discussion with that person right now. And so sometimes it is just, you have to disengage, but there are other times where you have to, you have to get involved. So you're talking about the C is like call for help or call them out, whichever one it needs to be, you need to do that. And you can't be like superhero, I'm going to save the day all the time. And you have to understand time and place, right? So sometimes it's not the time or the place to call them out, but at some point there has to be this intervention. And, Tony said this, and I say this all the time, like the easiest way to overcome a lot of this is to have a conversation. That's the easiest way. Like, talk to me. You think this about me? Talk to me.
Yeah.
Ask me questions.
I think maybe part of that is white people don't want to check each other on this.
Mm-hmm.
It may be a hard conversation to have, but sometimes you have to pull each other aside and say, hey, that wasn't right what you said, and it wasn't right because of this, because of X, Y, and Z. Sometimes it may come off better from, someone in their peer group versus, me, because if I do it and I'm looking like a preachy, angry black woman who's looking for, something that maybe I don't deserve, or who is stepping out of her place and trying to correct you. But when white people correct one another, when they handle one another, that's sometimes more a pill that's easier to swallow. And that's what they need to do. That's a responsibility.
Yeah. And that's what I was agreeing to, because I agree, Kelly, that there are times you should disengage from people. I agree 100%.
Yes.
What I find is people who just automatically do that. And to me, that's walking away from the topic then versus, you need to do it at certain times or history. I agree.
Yeah.
But I
know because we think there's this thing that it's not my problem. Like, it's not happening to me. It's not my problem. So I don't have to deal with it. Right. And one of the comments, they said something about, is there an implied threat of loss of privilege being placed in the Black camp that has white people be silent? And I think that that's so true, that you don't want to be the person. Maybe some white people don't want to be the person to be like calling out people, because somehow that puts you on our side and then removes you from that place of privilege, right? Because now you're one of us instead of one of them.
And so what happens normally, Kelly, remember it was
Well,
I don't
I
see
would
color.
want to add
So
to what
if I
Quinn
don't
said
see
a few moments
color,
ago
then I
also.
don't have to comment on what's going on because it's really not happening to me because it really doesn't affect me because I don't see color.
Right.
Right. Well, the other thing is, I think, Mike, I think for anyone, before they cut someone off, I think the other part is explaining to them why you're cutting them off.
Mhm.
So that there is
Yes.
so that's not a conflict avoidance, but it is we have hit a point where we can no longer here are the things and here are the reasons. I think sometimes that also communicates, because I agree with Kelly, like, you can't save everybody. I think the question that was just popped up a moment ago, it's fascinating. I remember I was giving an unconscious bias workshop. I do a lot with federal agencies, and it's crazy. Even as you see me semi-multitasking, I'm actually supposed to be on with a client right now. I push them back, but I also have I have a lot of friends, because I do a lot of training for law enforcement, especially for Homeland Security and some other federal agencies. And this is the first time I've actually heard them speaking out, which I think is a big statement. There's a little bit of a change going. The question about the implied loss of privilege, I remember giving a workshop. It was a non-law enforcement agency. And someone finally came up and asked me, said, well, here's a question. If we do all these things, then who's the loser?
Mm.
And I think that that's something that, whether people are in touch with it or whether it's under the surface, even though people would love to say they love to think that they don't have privilege, I think that the reality of, if I make this more, if I give these people more access and there's more opportunity, then doesn't that somehow mean that there's less opportunity for me? And I think that is a fear that people actually have to deal with. Now, we know that before COVID, a lot of the growth that had happened in the U.S. economy was actually from the advancements of the efforts to have, especially minority women and women in general, get into higher positions. So it actually improved the economy. But that fear is legitimately there. And until that part's addressed, you're going to have a problem. And one of the things I always think about is, how many of us had bad bosses before? Probably all.
Yeah.
Removing some privilege will keep underqualified people from getting those positions.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot that goes into that you really have to unpack. But I do think that threat of loss of privilege is
real,
somewhere in the background, and it is very real.
And that goes to the two Americas, right? And they're the 3, the 4, the 5, the 6 Americas. As Sam had made that comment, if you're white, just have no idea what's really present in our country, in regards to not being white, right? Because whiteness, that's what you know. So like, people say to me, I've had people do it for me on stage. There's times where I address privilege in my work, and people go, well, you're a white man, so why you have no place to address privilege? And I'm like, actually, I need to know my privilege from the stage, because it impacts how you hear me, how you're impacted by my words. And so what I'll say, the container I present myself in can impact how you hear me. And Quinn knows this, where we work in the same similar field. And that in my line of work, it's, if I was a woman saying it, they go, of course you're saying it as a woman. But if I'm a guy saying it, it's like, ooh, why is the guy saying it? And it's the same thing here. Oh, the white guy's saying it, right? So it's the same possibility there versus, well, of course, a black person's complaining about race, which is a horrible concept, versus I want to listen to the person who's experienced racism more. I should. That's what my brain should tell me, because they have an experience I have not had. That would be common sense.
Yeah. The Public Religious Research Institute did a study. 70% of white people in the United States do not have a black friend, self-reported. Okay, I think that's really important. So when people go, well, I have a black friend, really? Tell me about them. Give me their name. They grow up. Oh, you mean a coworker? Oh, that's what you mean, right? I think that there's that. But even beyond that, what that tells us is that, because the same study talks about black people are 9 times more likely to have a white friend than white people are a black friend. So black people are far more in touch with white America especially because that's really what's portrayed in the media anyway, than white people are with Black America. And
But because we have to be, right?
We have
Because
to be in order to
we don't have a
survive.
choice.
We have
got
to
that
be.
right.
There's no other way for us to make it.
Right, exactly. And I don't think people realize that. So, you know,
They don't.
there's this idea that we're not aware of everything else that's going on. No, we're completely aware, you know, but at the same time, without that dialogue and without, you know, all these other things, there is no way that people are going to understand what the real world is like for us.
Yeah. And we have to learn to
the
navigate spaces the way that white people don't have to navigate spaces, right? So we're always trying to, no matter, we're doing a lot of things, right? I'm trying to prove to you that I'm competent, even though I have a saying, I belong everywhere I am. And so I know I'm competent, right? But there's always this, we have to show that we're competent. We have to show that we're non-threatening. I have to show you that I'm not aggressive. I have to make sure that you're comfortable. I have all these jobs that I need to do in order to be able to fit into this world so that you feel comfortable around me, because I'm the non-threatening one. Right. I'm not like the others. You're not like other Black people. I don't know what the heck that means, but you're not like other Black people. No, I am Black people. I am Black people, right? And so, but we have so many jobs that when we wake up in the morning that we have to deal with and that we have to come into spaces with. And so, you know, when we talk about white privilege and people get so upset, there was a guy on Facebook the other day and he goes, the fact that you say white privilege is racist. Okay, whatever. But
yes, I've heard
and
lots
so
of
then
times.
it's like, don't take that on personally. Like if you are not a person who uses your white privilege to negatively impact somebody, then don't take it on, because you're not what you're called. You're what you answer to, right? So don't take that on. Understand that it exists and teach other people about it. And when you see it being used to negatively impact others, call it out, period. That's it. End of story. And by the way, let Black people live. Like, just let us live our life just the way that you live your life every day. When you get up in the morning and do what you want to do, let us do the same thing. I mean, you know, I say it's just that simple. It's really, you know, it is really just that simple. But in this country, it's just not what people want to do, not what a lot of people want to do.
Yeah, there's NGB captain's been very active throughout the discussion today. They talk about the video by Jane Elliott where the white audience, no one stood because they knew and understood what Black people are experiencing and did not want it for themselves. So this isn't an experiment, right? This isn't even real life. This is an experiment. So
right.
That's scary in and of itself. And you know, when she first went on Oprah for the first time and did the blue eye, brown eye, I mean, those of us old enough to remember that, you know, that was, but it was, once again, it was a blimp in our life moment. And nobody was talking about it a month later versus what are we doing to work on that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's what it is. You know, we continue to have these conversations, but the conversations have to then include like action. It has to include, what are the actionable steps? What are the things that we can measure going forward to ensure that we are making some type of change? And, you know, I love talking, so I love being a part of conversations, but I don't like being a part of conversations that don't lead to something and something being done and lead to action, right? So we have to continue to talk about these things so that people understand and that people can experience and so that people can feel and so that people can more than just see, but try to understand, okay, how do I put myself in that space? But then once they get to that place where they put themselves in the space, okay, what do I do to make sure that it doesn't continue to happen? How do I become not just a, I hear you, girl, kind of ally, and I'm here to be heard for my girl. I am here to stand up for you. And when you're not in the room, you know that if something happens, I got you. I'm going to speak up for you when you're not there, because a lot of times these things happen when we're not there, right? And so we have to rely on people who don't look like us to then advocate for us and speak up for us in those spaces. And so it's not enough to just have these great kumbaya conversations with us. When you're done, I need you to then speak up for me when I cannot speak up for myself.
Yeah, and one of the ground floor, and I think some of you may be aware of this. I don't remember who I did share it with or not. Somebody had asked, "What are you doing next, Mike?" And I said, well, and I did mention to all of you, I think that we need to listen as white individuals, but not put the onus on the solution on Black individuals. That has to be on us because we have the power of authority in this country and in this society. That has to be on us. So my intention going forward is to do a similar conversation where everybody's white on this discussion about now what are we doing, right? That's the next conversation. I do feel it's important to hear first what we need to hear, what's important for us to hear. You've given such important insights and experience. The few times, there's been drop mic moments for me just listening to you as a person that comes from privilege. I knew coming into this that my children don't have to wake up with the fears yours do. That hurts me. That makes me emotional to think a child has to fear that your children do it. It made me, I'm emotional now. It made me emotional to know those two men didn't feel safe today, who are powerful men. Right. And that's not a knock on them. That's an awakening of where we're at. And if we're not crying, why not? Like, how can you not? Right. And I think it's easy to not cry if you look at the riots. Right. If you find a distraction, it allows you not to cry because then you can get angry at a new person.
Yeah.
And you don't have to cry. You don't have to feel emotion. So I want to thank you for opening that emotion on a real level so we can not understand what you experience, because that's not possible. We're not experiencing it. We talked about that at the beginning of this. Walk a mile in someone's shoe is not living their life in those shoes for that mile. But to give us a reminder, an acknowledgement of what we need to consider moving forward and the 4 C's, things we can do. Thank you, all three of you, and everybody who's been on today. A huge thank you.
Thank you so much for having this conversation. And Mike, the other thing I would say to you is that once you have a conversation with the white people, then we all need to have a conversation, right? We can't have these conversations in silos. We have to come together to have these conversations so that we can work together.
Yeah, we have to come together. And I think, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm having
Go ahead, Tony. Go ahead, Tony.
I know Tony was having some audio issues there. He had privately noted that to me. Well, here's my commitment. Yes and yes.
Yay.
Okay. So after we have this,
we need to come together. I think the onus cannot be on us, like you said, but we have to get great input and insight. I think that's absolutely necessary. We need to work together. I think the reality, I woke up yesterday to my younger son having a conversation about, with us about race, police brutality, and how unsafe it is and how much fear he's in being a Black male. That's reality. And when it's your kid, I can handle it for myself, but when it's your kid, it's that. And it's funny because when I posted it, so many, you got to see the dichotomy of responses. The white responses were, "Oh my God, I feel so bad for you." And I get that. The Black responses were kind of like, "Well, you got to have the talk."
I think he's saying you got to have the talk.
You know what I mean?
You got to have the talk.
Yeah, I've already had the talk. This was more, he needed to vent. But the fact that it's so universally understood amongst our people that we have to have a talk with our kids about how to interact with police so that you can survive. Like, hopefully. I am in fear I'm literally in fear every time a police car pulls behind me. I am. Yeah. It's to the point where it's a Pavlovian response. I'm in fear because I am one thing. I am completely helpless. Yeah. That's what I know. And I think that is part of the reality that people don't understand. That, as these panels and more conversations start to happen, that it goes beyond just the police. It goes to how it feels to be at work, how it feels to be a minority entrepreneur, how it feels to be a Black speaker, how it feels to be, all the different intersections. Yeah, Kelly's laughing because she knows. but all the different intersections that we deal with, and yet we do it in a vacuum because we have the conversations amongst ourselves. But the minute we start having it outside of that circle, it gets shut down and it's obviously uncomfortable.
Well, and before we wrap up, here we have this comment, when we have an all white audience here, as far as guests, they're saying it'd be important to hear their thinking and perspective before asking how we can fix it, which is really great insight. I was intentional on who I invited today, so we had a safe, supportive environment for this conversation. That was intentional. And I think it would be the same with who I invite as far as those who would be white. Now, the question is, do you think we should have a white only before a mixed conversation, or should that come after a mixed conversation? Now, Kelly, you're saying before.
I think you have it before. And I think also what you have to have is not we all agree on what the issues are, and the Black experience is a shared experience. And so we generally will have the same. But I think what would be really insightful for you is to have a white audience that does not think the same, and so that you can get the different perspectives about why people think. Some people think, yes, there is white privilege. Others think, no, there's not white privilege. Yes, this was a Black issue. No, that was not a Black issue. It's just a human issue, which is what a lot of people are saying. Because I think we have to understand where the roadblocks are. Where is it that people are having blocks so that we can help them to move past it? And some we can help and some you can't, right? Like I said, you can't change everybody. But, as a defense attorney, I always had to know the other side's case to be able to properly defend my case. I have to know the whole picture. And so I think in moving through this, we have to know what everyone thinks about. My husband, he'll watch MSNBC and CNN, but then I'll hear him watching Fox. He's like, yeah, Kelly, because I need to know what they're saying, right? I need to know what they're thinking. And that is true. We need to know what the other people are thinking so that we can help them to move through it, or really just how to then deal with them.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you, because I could see myself and some friends having somebody on with a different opinion on this issue and thinking we have to fix them in this 1 hour, and that ain't going to work, right?
No.
That's not going to happen. And so you have to be very careful of, if I do that, I'm just throwing this out so I understand, right? Let them reveal, right? Let them be their truest self. So we then, when we come together, we have the true perspective versus the term, which is the term in of itself, whitewashing, doing that so that we're not seeing the whole picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, that person is not an anomaly. They represent a whole demographic of people. And so you've got to see it. And, one thing I think, number one, I appreciate your effort in this and your thoughts behind it. I think the obvious part that, it's assumed each group has to have way more than one conversation.
Yeah.
Right. I know that you invited other speakers on here who didn't make it. I know who some of them are because we've group chatted this morning. And I'll say many of them are just tired because I was literally on these types of conversations until 2 a.m. last night because it's exhausting. And so there has to be even a chance to grasp air before having to now come and teach, which is, a fascinating dynamic. So, there's got to be many conversations. And the truth of it is, you shouldn't be organizing all of this. There are a lot of people who are in this, who are watching this, who have the ability to pull their own circles together. All those conversations can start pulling together.
Yeah, it's something that I've been thinking about, like having town halls, because I think it's really important. And so if anybody wants to work with me to pull together town halls to really have these conversations, because I think it's the experience of having the conversations and hearing and really, oh, okay. And, they may not change and they may not get it in that moment, but you have to keep doing it. And you have to keep having conversations and you have to keep explaining and you have to keep showing them what it looks like in real life. So, the George Floyds of the world, that is TV, right? For most people, that's not their real life. But if I talk to you about how you're operating in your job or how you operate at the supermarket or at the airport, then you may be able to get it. Then you may be able to understand that. And that comes not from, me just training you. That comes from us having a real real talk, real conversation, down to earth, bare bones. Let's get real. This is what's happening. Throw away pull back your defenses, and let's just have a conversation.
Well, I want to thank all three of you for this conversation. You three know this isn't my focal point of my business. This isn't what I do for a living. So this came from, I woke up and like, I have to do something. And my skill is having a conversation. And so I was trying to use some way that I could make it, hopefully somebody could watch something and see something, or even for me, which this has turned into, to learn. Right. And I have always said that if you do an interview and you, the interviewer, learn and nobody watches, the interview is worth it as far as from the interviewer perspective, because you learned and you all helped me grow today and learn. And I know I have a lot more to learn. So thank you all for joining me today. So appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate having the conversation.
Absolutely. If anybody's seeing this live and wondering, can we get this video back? Like, how do we watch this if we want to watch this later? This was broadcast live on YouTube and Facebook, which means it'll be on our YouTube channel. I have to go and just make it on the public side, but you would just go to youtube.com/Center for Respect. That's a lot easier than Facebook pages, but youtube.com/Center for Respect. Within like 10 minutes of this being done, I'll make sure it's on the public page, on the front of the page there, so people can easily find it. In the latest uploads, just to make that easier. And of course, it is on Facebook. If you're watching us on Facebook, that's where you can share it. So that's easy enough. So thank you all once again. And for the four of you and Karen earlier, I will get you also links for yourselves if you want. So
thank you.
So thank you very much.
Bye, Quin. Bye, Tony.
Have a wonderful weekend.
See you guys.
You too.
Take care, everybody. Be safe and well.
You too.
Goodbye,
Thanks,
everybody. Yeah. Stay
Thank
safe
you.
and stay sane.
Right?
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much.
That's what it is, baby.
Yeah, bye.
All right. See you.
Bye.